Okay, well, thank you for joining us for today's lecture, sponsored by the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences. We will wait just a couple minutes here for additional people to log on. Let's get started. Hello, I'm John Freeman. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences, and I will be introducing this afternoon's speaker, Dr. Kevin Binning. Dr. Binning is a faculty member in the Department of Psychology at the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Binning's research examines psychological factors affecting equity in education. His research is an excellent example of how psychological science can identify aspects of the learning context that contribute to inequity in education. His work also demonstrates how psychological research can be applied to interventions that address inequity, and we will hear about one of those interventions today. During the talk, please post your questions using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and Dr. Binning will answer them at the end of the talk. So now I will turn it over to you now, Dr. Binning, and welcome to the University of Iowa.
All right, thanks, John. Thank you all for having me. This is a real treat. And yeah, let's see. So I'm a social psychologist, but I'm pitching today's talk at a kind of a more general level. Although I know and kind of hope there's some psychologists in the audience. Let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. And all right, let's see, pull that up. Okay, all right, so go ahead and get started here. I'm going to be talking today, as John mentioned, about what I'm calling the ecological belonging intervention. I'll kind of unpack what that means here in a minute. And using this intervention to foster equity in college STEM courses. Okay, so just to start off about kind of the areas that I really want to speak to, that I think this work speaks to, I want to talk a little bit about the diversity challenge. And I think several of you probably have heard it framed in this way, that it kind of is composed of two major components. One you can call structural. This is to create context with fair representation. And so at the University of Pittsburgh, we have cluster hiring programs. We have new policies to increase Pell Grant matching programs and to get students from diverse backgrounds on campus. But once they're actually on campus, our goal, that's the second element of this challenge, is to create contexts where all people can thrive. Okay, and so this latter kind of element of the diversity challenge is really what I think my work is targeted towards. Okay, so how do we create context, and what I'll be focusing on, our classrooms, universities, where all students can reach their full potential. So the little bit of an overview here, I'm just going to go pretty quickly through some background and supporting theory. And probably the bulk of the talk, I'm actually going to be telling you about this intervention, this ecological belonging intervention. I'm going to demonstrate, replicate, and try to understand some boundary conditions of this ecological belonging intervention. And we'll end with some practical implications, hopefully some useful take-homes and things maybe you can implement in your own practice with students. Okay, so what is ecological belonging? It's kind of a mouthful, right? So let's break it down a little bit. So ecological, this is literally a dictionary definition, is just relating to or concerned with the relation of living organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings, okay? So this is not just purely psychological. We're not just targeting individuals, we're actually trying to change the way that students relate to one another, okay? And the physical surroundings, so the students are our organisms, if you will, and the physical surroundings, that's the classroom, right? So then the ecological belonging is the way students perceive and relate to one another shapes their sense of belonging in the classroom. Okay, and so an ecological belonging intervention then is that's our effort to change how students perceive and relate to their peers in ways that promote belonging in the classroom. Okay, so why is this important? Why do we need to focus on this ecological thing? Well, I want to bring up stereotype threat in the work of Claude Steele. And this idea of this really important paper from 1997, this was published in the American Psychologist, this idea that stereotypes exist in the air. Okay? That, in other words, they don't just exist in my mind and in your mind, but also I know that you know about these stereotypes, okay? And you know that I know that you know, right? And so they have this intersubjective reality to them, okay? And in fact, the definition of stereotype threat that's been around for a long time is actually the concern that others will judge you in light of a negative stereotype. It's not that I believe the stereotype, it's that I know that you might believe it. And actually this belief is often well-founded, and because we do stereotype people, especially when we're first getting to know them. So this is not an irrational concern by any means, this concern that other people are going to be stereotyping me. And so why is stereotype threat important? Well, stereotype threat can hinder the performance of the targets of stereotype threat. This is, Claude Steele talks about this, it's almost like your distracting alarm is going off while you're trying to learn or while you're trying to take a test, that it's essentially eating up cognitive resources. Instead of focusing on the tasks at hand, instead of focusing on the instructor and on the PowerPoint or on the problem in front of me, I'm worried about the stereotype. And it's eating up working memory. It's eating up the very thing that I need to perform well, okay? But it not only hinders the performance of the targets of stereotype threat, what's also, I think, lesser known is that there's a great deal of research that it also hinders the performance of non-targets. Okay? The fact that these stereotypes are in the room can make non-stereotyped members, they're aware of this, they often can be stereotype threatened themselves about appearing racist or about appearing prejudiced. By virtue of these stereotypes being in the room and knowing and working with other students who are under stereotype threat, the majority group is actually deprived of working with other students who are at their full potential as well. Okay, so there's a variety of sort of mechanisms in which not only the stereotype threatened group, but the non-stereotype threatened groups can suffer from the fact that these stereotypes are in the classroom, they're in the air. Students are worried about them, students are aware of them. Okay, so where I'm kind of going with this then is that performance gaps that we see in many of our classes, although not all of them, and not all groups and all classes, performance gaps are not solely due to societal forces. Societal forces, they set the stage, they're important, but what I'm really focused on with this line of work is the gaps that are emerging due to social psychological processes that are emerging in the social interactions in the classroom. In front of us as instructors, the students, the way they interact with each other, that is what I'm focusing on here, okay? And I'm going to argue that part of the gaps that we see in any given classroom are due to the way that students are relating to themselves, the way they perceive their peers and their instructors within their classrooms. So let's go through a graphical example of this. What do I mean? So let's imagine this cloud is stereotypes, and let's imagine this is a physics classroom, and it's a difficult physics engineering classroom. You've got a woman here faced with a difficult problem. Let's say she's struggling with this particular problem, and maybe it's early on in the semester. She's got doubts. Maybe one of these doubts is that, you know what, I know about these negative stereotypes about women in engineering. Maybe the fact that I'm struggling, this might mean that I don't belong here. This might be evidence that I don't fit in. On the other hand, Maybe she doesn't belong here, right? That her partner that she's working with also is aware of these negative stereotypes, and she's aware that he's aware, and so on, right? So it's both sides of the problem here. If you're working in a group context, this is what women in engineering are contending with, and we know this not only through our data. We've run extensive focus groups and qualitative interviews with women in engineering. And so it's not all women, but it's a very common experience, this kind of chilly climate, this awareness of stereotypes that men are kind of judging them or might judge them because they're a woman. So what we want to do is change the social ecology. Okay? This work is going to be, it actually builds on prior social belonging interventions, the pioneering work of Greg Walton, Jeff Cohen, David Yeager, and their colleagues and students. But it's got a little twist to it. I want to emphasize this. This work tries to establish the norm in the classroom, that adversity in college, in the classroom, making friends, all of the elements of university life, adversity is universal and it's temporary. In other words, we don't all struggle at the same time, but we all struggle at some point. That's the universal element, and it's temporary and surmountable. You might be struggling now, but this is not your lot in life. This is not how it's going to be forever, right? Contrast this, what's the opposite here? Think about the woman struggling with that one problem, that maybe this is about me, right? This is about me because of my gender or my ethnicity or race, or the fact that I'm first generation, right? It's not universal, it's a unique experience, and I might be the only one who's worried about this. And that if it is, that might mean that I never will belong here, right? So no, it's not that. It's not unique and permanent, it's universal and temporary. That's essentially the subtext of this intervention, what we're trying to get students to sort of adopt this mindset about their university experience and about their experience within these classrooms. So the intervention is presented by the instructor to all students simultaneously, and they engage in conversation around the message. So this is what makes this an ecological belonging intervention. We're not bringing students to the lab and presenting them this information. I've done that work. It's great. It's a very important work that you can learn a lot from it, but this is a little different. We're actually having the instructor trained in this intervention and then delivering it to their students. And then the students are actually communicating the intervention message to each other, right? They're getting social proof of the message in this process, okay? So what we're trying to end up with then is that we remove these stereotypes. We sort of put them in the background, okay? You don't need the stereotypes to explain why you're struggling. You just don't need it, right? You don't have to go there. You can say, you know what, this is actually normal to struggle and I can figure this out, okay? And similarly, the man in the classroom might say, you know what, she might be struggling, but I know she can figure this out. Okay? So how do we do this? How are we going to get to this point where the stereotypes sort of fall into the background and the intervention message comes to the foreground? Well, let me move my Zoom controls out of the way here really quickly. I'm going to walk you through kind of in detail what this intervention is, okay? I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. One, so you'll understand the data and what we did, but two, because it's my hope that some of you may incorporate either this intervention or some elements of this intervention in your own teaching and your own interactions with students. And I'm happy to talk about that as well later if that is the case. Okay, so the first thing that we need to know is that I assume Iowa is similar. At the University of Pittsburgh, we have these very large STEM lecture courses. The one we started this work in was Introductory Biology, and it is a 300-person lecture course, okay? But off this lecture course, we have what Pitt calls recitation sections. My grad program called these discussion sections. I'll probably use recitation because that's gotten into my mind now. So all these are smaller subsets of the large lecture. And in this case, in biology, there were 4 recitation sections off of each lecture of roughly 75 to 80 students each, okay? And these recitation sections met weekly. The lecture was actually bi-weekly, twice a week. These recitation sections met weekly. And in these recitation sections, students formed small groups and worked on problems together, okay? In fact, as a little bit of an aside, one of the instructors who, Erica McGreevy, was actually a co-author on this work, noticed in these recitation sections that a lot of students, and a lot of times it was students of color, were not participating fully in these recitation sections. And this was actually part of the impetus to do this intervention in the first place. In what we ended up doing is, let's take this biology example. In a given semester, if there are 4 recitation sections, we just picked 2 of them and ran the intervention in. And in the other 2, we just did business as usual, okay? It's important, I think, I want to spend a moment to talk about what the business as usual was in this case, because I think it's actually a really important contrast, something that I think a lot of us do. This business as usual consisted of what we commonly call icebreaker activities, okay? These are basically social bonding exercises. Okay? And in this particular class, what the icebreaker was is the instructor put quotes up around the room, asked students to get up and go stand by a quote that they liked, their favorite quote. These were quotes by famous scientists, famous biologists. Then when the students were standing there, the instructor said, okay, I want you to form a group with 3 other students, so groups of 4. Go back, sit by each other. I want you to come up with a group mascot that's biology related. And the one that always stuck with me is the heterozygotes. Okay, so this is our team name, our team of 4 students. The instructor says, I also want you to draw a picture of this. And then the groups took turns presenting their picture and their mascot to the class. It was fun, it was engaging, students enjoyed it. But what it was missing was the intervention content, right? What I'm going to call these the active ingredient of this messaging to teach students that adversity in college is universal and temporary, surmountable, okay? So I'm going to walk you through in pretty close detail what this intervention actually entailed. Okay, so it starts off with the instructor, they form groups pretty quickly, okay? In roughly similar way, the groups are formed, and then for the last 30 minutes of the first recitation of the year, okay, of the semester, they spend doing this activity. So the instructor says, we're going to do something a little different today. We're not going to talk about biology. We're going to talk about your experience as college students. This is all scripted by the instructor who we've trained. It can be easy to feel overwhelmed or to sometimes wonder to yourself, do I really belong here? What are we doing here? The instructor right away is trying to establish norms, okay? Establish the intervention as a norm that he or she sees and knows to be true, okay? Take a moment and just imagine yourself in this classroom with 300 of your peers and your instructor's up there saying this message, right? For many of you, this is the first time you are leaving home. You're meeting a lot of new people, taking on a lot of new courses and trying to find your place here at Pitt. It can be easy to feel overwhelmed and to ask yourself, do I really belong here? And am I smart enough to make it? Okay. So right after that, the instructor then says, okay, now I want you I'll take out a pen and paper, or in the last 2 semesters, open up a Word document. We actually did this over Zoom, which I'm happy to discuss during Q&A if you have questions about this, but I'm going to stick to the in-class version because I'm going to hope that's our future. So they then engage in this independent reflective writing activity. Okay, this is 5 to 10 minutes or so. And here's the prompt that they read. Please write about some difficulties you have experienced in the transition to college, as well as some of the difficulties and challenges you have begun to improve and how these challenges have begun to improve with time as you've spent more time in college. So what are we doing here? Okay, so the instructors kind of set the norm verbally. Now we're trying to get students to reflect on their own experience and notice the language here. We're trying to get them to notice and to think about how their challenges and difficulties might improve with time. Okay, you might be going through stuff, but this is a trajectory. This is not your permanent lot. This is something that's going to unfold and change and evolve as time goes on, as you persist, as the semester ensues. Students have no problem writing this, okay? I should also mention what's coming up, just to foreshadow a little bit. We not only wanted them to start thinking about their own experiences and sort of framing them as unfolding on a trajectory, but also, they don't know this, but they're going to be talking about their experiences in about, according to them, about 5 or 10 minutes. So we wanted them to have stuff to talk about, right? To have already thought about this, to already have their thoughts organized about what their experience has been like, okay? And I just show you this writing here. Students had no problem doing this. Now, granted, there's always a couple students who are too cool for school that don't want to engage, but I would say by and large, this is like, one of my colleagues calls this, it's like water on parched earth. Like students want to talk about this stuff. So let's read a couple. I read these every semester and I never get tired of them. They're really compelling and they really remind you of what it was like to be a college student. So here's what one student wrote. Though college overall is a difficult transition in itself, the hardest part most definitely is allowing my mind to digest new information from numerous classes all at once. I've never been accustomed to having multiple rigorous courses from period to period in a row. From online to paper assignments to programming, it's all pretty new. Yet at times I may think to myself, oh, I'm not sure I'm up to the challenge, I'm cut out for it. Yet I keep pushing to allow myself to adjust. It's the push that's got me to where I am, that's going to get me to where I want to go. Moreover, I miss the comfort of my own home, and I almost forgot my mommy. Okay, I want to read one more to you. Not all students kind of wrote in such prose. This student just did bullet points. Concerned about time management, that's not going to change. Concerned if engineering is right for me, this won't change. I should mention this was from the physics intervention. Desire to leave and go home, never will change. Procrastination may change, but I love TV. Being independent, nope. Physics and engineering, 0011, kill me now. Getting sick at college, always worried. How to transfer, maybe. How to become a commuter after signing up to live on campus, any info? Computer troubles, already had some. Feeling lonely, lack of exercise. Do the hills count? Our campus is pretty hilly, and yes, the hills definitely count. One of them is even called Cardiac Hill. Getting fat, see above, and Andrew, right? So just a little bit of a taste here, but students did do this. It took about 5 or 10 minutes of class time. We then collect them. We also tell them not to put their name on this. This is a small thing, but I think an important piece, so that they don't feel like they're being evaluated, right? They're anonymous, and this is not part of your grade, right? You can't be graded if it can't be traced back to you. Okay, so students, the instructor set the norm, they've reflected on their own, and now we're going to give them some stories from graduating seniors designed to highlight and overcoming challenges and adversity. Okay, so now we're going to get students who've walked in your shoes and they've written some stories for us about their experience, what they went through, right? So students just wrote what they're currently going through. Now we're going to hear from older students who've kind of gone through that path. Before coming to college, I didn't worry much about grades, so I felt unprepared for the increased workload and differences in grading. I remember being surprised after getting burned grade-wise several times and feeling stressed as a result. Okay, notice the change in narrative. So that was the initial struggle, right? Students are reading this, and the instructor's reading this out loud. But then I got some help from the instructor and the TA. Here's the turning point. All good narratives have this, right? I found a study group and was able to turn things around. Looking back now, I think my struggles were pretty normal. Even though people don't like to admit it, basically everyone has trouble with certain concepts. Although it was a somewhat rocky start, it felt good to learn from my mistakes, and I'm proud of the success I've had. So this student, who we have identified as an Asian American senior, in part because this was a class, an intervention that was trying to target the race gap. I'll explain this a little bit more as we go through the data. But notice that the intervention message is embedded in the quote, okay? That is, it's universal to struggle. I struggled, it's something we all go through. It's pretty normal, right? And they got through it. It was a temporary thing, it was a bump in the road. It was a hiccup. It wasn't their permanent existence, okay? We gave them 4 quotes like this. We attributed them to different students from different groups. When we were targeting the gender gap, we attributed the quotes to men and women. When we were targeting the race and ethnicity gap, we attributed the quotes to members of different racial groups. We wanted it to be clear that this was not something unique to men or women or members of particular groups. This was something that all students went through, okay? So that's the stories element. And now comes what I argue is kind of the most crucial element of this ecological belonging intervention. It's when they actually now start to discuss with the quotes and all the things that they've gone through so far in the intervention with their teammates, with their group that they've just formed, with their group that they're going to be working with throughout the term. Okay, and this is week 1 or in week 2 in some cases. Okay, So this is not just a one-off thing. This is not a thing that was just made for the experiment. This is the group that you will be with, working at the frontiers of your ability, having doubts, struggling on problems throughout the upcoming semester. Okay, and we did this, and we used what Bob Cialdini might call psychological jujitsu. Okay, we're actually going to use conversational norms to sort of get the group to sort of adopt the intervention message as common ground, as given in their conversations with each other. Okay, and it was it sounds complicated, but this is how we did it. It's pretty straightforward. We asked them these two very sort of structured and deliberate questions. Okay? And see if you can pick up on this by just reading this. Why do you think people often think they're the only one who worries about whether they fit in college? We want you guys to talk about this. Okay, what are we doing here? Well, you'll notice the premise of this question is what we just told them, right? With the quotes, with the instructor, with the quotes just demonstrated, which is that people often think they're the only ones who's worried about whether they fit in college, okay? In order to answer this question, you need to adopt that premise, because now we're saying, why is that the case, okay? So it seems almost kind of commonsensical, right? That this is how conversation works, of course, but this is very deliberate, right? We've sort of established the common ground with these quotes, and now we're getting students to adopt this as the sort of the baseline of their conversations. The second question was, how do you think your life will be different when you're a junior or a senior? Again, the subtext here, hey, your life is going to be different when you're a junior or a senior. I want you to tell us how, right? And so to answer this question, again, the students kind of need to adopt this idea that, yeah, my life will be different as a junior or senior. You can kind of walk through and imagine how students might answer this, right? They're gonna be established. They're gonna feel like a regular Pitt student. They're no longer gonna be a new student, and so on. And this is what students do talk about, just based on our observations. And again, this is another activity that students want to talk about this stuff. This is stuff that they've got on their chest that they're happy to share, especially because they've just written about it, right? Okay, and then the final element of this, they do that for 7 to 10 minutes or so. And then the last 5 minutes or so of the intervention is just to bring it back up to the classroom level, okay? It's possible some of the groups were duds, right? They didn't want to talk, they didn't want to engage. Even if that's true, there's still this final catch-all where the instructor just basically says, as we tend to do after these group sharing exercises, right? Share back, tell us what you talked about. The recitation-wide discussion and sharing of undergraduate teaching assistants and students. The students then, the instructor just said, hey, what did you guys talk about? And students raised their hand, and then, for example, I'll give you one example. It was in biology. I was observing this, and the student rose her hand and said, we just all realized that we're all really nervous about this class because it's been so long since we took biology. And as I was sitting there, I was like, wait a second, she's right. Like, you take biology. I took biology as a sophomore in high school. They're now first-year students in college. So it's been years since they've taken it. I'm sure they did well in high school, or they wouldn't be at Pitt. But they're nervous, right? That has our knowledge changed? Has the field gotten more complicated in the interim? And again, this is your group that you're going to be working with, and they shared this together. Okay, and so if you're in the classroom, your group talked about something else. You hear that, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's I feel the same way, right? Okay, so this is just the quote from the instructor to bring it back. I've been hearing great discussions. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think your feedback is going to be really helpful for the physics department. So the instructor frames this as kind of, we're seeking your feedback. We want your help about what it's like to be a new student in physics or engineering or biology. Okay. Okay, so that's the intervention in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer questions about that during the Q&A. And folks like yourself have watched this talk and then incorporated elements of that intervention in their class. I have materials, I have scripts, I'm happy to share, happy to jump on Zoom and talk you through it. But let's go through some results. So maybe this will help convince you to do this. Actually, not all the results are perfect, which is actually, I think, really important and instructive. One thing I will note, though, is that the analyses here are controlling for high school GPA, SAT and ACT scores, and they account for the nestedness of the data. through multi-level modeling when appropriate. Okay, so study one here is intervention in foundations of biology. I called this introductory biology before. This is what Pitt calls it. It's the first year intro bio course. As a side note, about 70% of students in this class have goals, career goals as first year students to go into medical school. We know that that's not going to happen. It's at most, it's going to maybe be 10%. So it's a really interesting and important course for a lot of students, a gateway course. We did this over 4 consecutive semesters with one instructor. Okay, and as I mentioned, each semester the instructor did 2 treatment and 2 business as usual. Okay, and so we had over 4 semesters. You can basically 16 sections of 80 students each, 8 of whom got the intervention, 8 sections got the control. If you do all that math over 4 semesters, you end up with about 1,215 students, which is our N. Here we go. This was just one instructor. This will vary across studies, so I'm just drawing your attention to that. The class in this case, this is also an important note. It'll become clear in a minute. This class is 66% women. Okay, this is women are a clear majority. The instructor was a woman, kind of an early career woman. And that's going to be a big contrast from our physics course. Okay, the historical data. So we analyzed this course. We went back 3 years, and an N of several thousand students, because there's several sections going on parallel in any given semester. And one thing we saw was that non-white students tended to underperform in this class. In other words, controlling for their SAT, GPA. Their SAT and GPA, we see gaps emerge in course grade. Okay, so this isn't due to differences in high school preparation. Okay, that's why we controlled for SAT and ACT and all these analyses. We're interested in what's emerging, right? What emerged in that during that course, and so we kind of controlled for their history, their preparation, if you will. Also, what's kind of interesting, and I know is not universal across universities, is that Asian students underperformed in this class across these previous 3 years. Asian American students. That was not the case in physics. So this is another important point. These performance gaps are often course specific. Okay, they don't exist across all courses for all students. It kind of depends, and I think that's part of the ecology, right? The domain, the course specific stereotypes and the different domains. Physics has different stereotypes than biology, and so on. Okay. One thing that's also notable about this is that women in historical data did not underperform in the class. They did not perform significantly worse than men, which again will be a contrast with the physics example in a minute. Okay, so let's look at some data here. What I'm going to show you here is first is their course grade. Okay, and I just put the course grade on a 4-point scale here. So that 4 is an A or A plus, and 0 is an F. Okay, so it's like a GPA scale. The first thing I want to show you is that we replicated the historical data in the control group. Okay, in the control group, controlling for the variables I mentioned, SAT and GPA, we see that white students are get significantly higher grades in this course than non-white students. Okay, our goal with this intervention was to eliminate this gap. And that's exactly what we saw. In the courses that received the intervention, there was no gap between white and non-white students. Okay, and notice too, I just want to draw your attention to this, how we closed the gap. Okay, because you could close the gap by bringing down the performance of white students and improving the performance of non-white students. That's not what happened here. And we keep seeing this repeatedly with this intervention. We're seeing that all students are benefiting at least a little bit. And this contrast for white students is not significant, but there is a main effect. Those of you who know statistics really well will know what this means. In other words, overall, there's just a difference with the intervention condition, got higher grades than the non-intervention. Okay, that was primarily driven by non-white students, although white students showed a little bit of a bump. But what about gender? Gender, remember, there was no gap in gender, no gender gap in this course. And again, we replicated that historical data in the control group, okay? And there was no intervention effect, okay? So there was arguably there was no there, right? There was no, potentially women weren't under threat in this course. And so the intervention didn't do much as a function of gender. Okay? All right, so let's take this to another context. Again, I'm harping on this idea that context matters, right? The different classrooms have different patterns of underperformance. So we did this other intervention, the second intervention, in basic physics for engineers. So we ran the first bio intervention for 2 years. Word got out, I started presenting around campus, and a physics faculty member who was the chair of the department, I believe at the time, asked if we could run this intervention in physics. So what we did is we ran some focus groups with women in physics to learn about what physics was like for women. And then we tailored those quotes. Remember the quotes from the older students? We actually changed those based on the nature of what we learned from the focus groups, okay? So there's a qualitative component here to sort of customizing these interventions for different contexts. If you do want to run this at Iowa, this is the conversation that we'll have. Can we contact former students to see what their experiences were? What are the patterns of underperformance in those particular classes? Maybe we can tweak the intervention to address where that is, where that's occurring, where these threats are in the air, okay? So this design was a little bit different. This was just 1 semester, okay? And we did it across physics, physics offering of 1 course, which was Basic Physics for Engineer, or Basic Physics for Engineering 1, which is, those of you who are in the disciplines will know this, but Iowa is probably similar. There's a couple different physics courses. There's ones that life science majors takes, which are, it's actually algebra-based physics. They usually take it when they're older, maybe junior or senior. This is a required course for engineering. This is calculus-based physics. This is a tough course, okay? The design for this was we did the intervention in 6 recitation sections. There were 3 instructors, and so each of those instructors had at least 2 actually exactly 2 recitations that got the intervention, and then their other recitations did not. These were also a little bit smaller course classes. The recitations were 20 to 30 students, and the lectures were 220. These are minor details. What's an important detail is that the class is 35% women. Okay, so women, unlike biology, where they're a distinct majority, they are a distinct minority in this class. And historical analyses had showed that women did underperform in this class. We do see, controlling for SAT and GPA, that women are getting lower grades in this course than men, okay? This is, by the way, this is not true across the engineering college. This is particularly true in this class, where we see this gap, okay? So like I said, we customized the quotes, and I'm gonna read, I know there's a lot of text here, I'll read this quickly. This is from Allison, who is a Pitt electrical engineering engineer. Okay, this was one that we crafted from the focus groups. I was one of just a handful of women in one of my intro physics study groups, and sometimes I felt a little embarrassed to ask questions. However, I quickly learned that other students usually had the same question, and we all benefited from working with each other and learning from each other. Sometimes I had difficulty with an idea my classmates understood. Other times they struggled with concepts I understood. I remember there wasn't always an aha moment where everything clicked. It's usually much more gradual. Notice there's a growth mindset that's coming up here. This is something that came up with our focus group. Those of you who are familiar with the work of Carol Dweck, this will ring a bell. It was usually much more gradual, with some concepts only becoming clear after lots of practice and discussion with my study group. I realized that everyone struggles sometimes, and the important thing is to not give up and help each other out. This idea, by the way, that there isn't always an aha moment was actually, that was a surprise to me. But whenever I talk to people who kind of know physics, who've taken physics, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's totally true." Like you have to like retrain your brain in physics, and it's a process. It's not something that happens overnight or that happens at the flip of a switch. It really is a long, drawn out process. And I just mentioned there were 2 quotes from women. The other quote from the other woman did not mention gender. Okay, so and then there were 2 quotes from men. Also didn't mention gender. So we're not like hitting him over the head with gender here. We're just mentioning it as part of the kind of the context that's there, okay? So you could be a man in this experiment, and yeah, you'll notice that, but it's not all that we're telling them, right? The other quotes looked a lot like the biology quotes, normalizing adversity, telling students that it's temporary, how they worked through it, and so on. But with a little bit of a physics flair to it, right? We use some physics examples in the quotes, angular momentum, and physics topics. Okay, so let's go through the data. This is the same y-axis as the last one. So these are their course grades. Let's look at the control group. We replicate again the historical data here. In the control group, women performed significantly lower than men in terms of their final course grade. Okay. Again, however, that gap was eliminated in the intervention condition. And again, it was eliminated by bringing up everyone a little bit and women a lot. Okay. So we didn't lower the performance of men to close the gap. We rose everyone's performance a little bit and women's performance a lot. There's also a really interesting, we weren't targeting race in this course in part due to statistical power issues. If you remember, this is a smaller sample, there's only 600 students or so. And the course is 82% white and 10% Asian American who did not underperform. But nevertheless, we actually see a really consistent pattern with what we saw in biology, where the intervention does seem to be doing something as a function of race, although this interaction did not reach conventional statistical significance levels. So maybe it could be statistical power issue, but the pattern is nevertheless consistent with what we'd expect based on underperformance by race, which was occurring in this class as well. And we see that in the control group here, right? Okay, so there's just a couple other data points I really want to show you. So the intervention, like I said, seemed to help everyone a little bit, and the students who were under threat, the students that we theorized who were coping with stereotypes and underperformance, helped them a lot. But there was some other data to show that actually everyone benefited a little bit. What I've done here is I'm showing you attendance in discussion section or recitation section by the courses that we intervened in, okay? So in 2017, we intervened in physics lectures, that's what these are. And then between 2015 and 17, we intervened in 4 biology classes, that's what these are, okay? And I've got a control and an intervention for each course. Okay, so here's what the control looked like, and here's what the intervention looked like. Pretty much across the board, we're seeing higher attendance in the discussion section where students got the intervention, okay? That is a significant trend. Also, one-year college persistence. Okay, so this is kind of an ad hoc definition of college persistence. All we did is we went a year after the intervention, we went to the transcripts and we said, okay, are you still at Pitt? And do you have a GPA higher than 0.00 for the last term, okay? If you withdrew from all your courses, you would have a 0.00, right? And if you're not in the data set, we inferred that you left. You might have gone to another college. We don't know that. And so this is, take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, but I do want to show what's kind of uncanny about this is how similar it looks to attendance. Same basic pattern. Let me show you that actually. Here's attendance. I should do these side by side, sorry about that. And here is one-year college persistence. So we're seeing overall, again, this is a main effect, okay? Students on average, not a huge effect, but it is significant. That's in part because retention is pretty high at Pitt, it's about 93%. So we didn't have a lot of room to wiggle there, but it's even higher in engineering, by the way, but we do see that pattern. Okay, so let's discuss short-term closing of the performance gaps and general benefits on attendance and retention. So do the effects replicate? Right? I think several of you are probably familiar with this idea of the replication crisis in psychology. And so a big question is, how replicable are these effects? Your lab showed this, we got great data. Was it a fluke? Could anyone else do it? So that's what we did with, I want to show you with study 3 here pretty quickly. Same methodology, but this was a replication attempt that we tried at the University of Minnesota. Several folks, by the way, have done the intervention, but just didn't collect data. Okay, this was the first attempt to actually do a treatment and a control, and where we actually collected data and got course grades from students at the end of the term. Okay, these are my collaborators at the University of Minnesota, a great team. Okay, so the intervention was implemented in a new course. It was implemented in chemistry for non-majors. So this is if you're required to take chemistry, but you're not a chemistry major, okay? We adapted the intervention to the context, meaning that the courses that students referenced, a couple of the reference in the quotes, right, in the student stories, these referenced University of Minnesota, not Pitt. They had the course names, they had the different majors for students. Okay, not a super intensive customization actually, just a few tweaks. It's an N of 586. This is not it's a super strong experimental design. In fact, it's fairly well. We had one treatment and one control classroom. We had one instructor. We asked this team actually asked this instructor to do this intervention. This is not a discipline-based education researcher. This is just a chemistry instructor who was happy to do it and ran the intervention. Okay, so again, here I've got course point percent. Actually, Sarah Hammerlin made this figure for me, so it's a little bit different axis here, but same pattern here. You see there is a gap in the control group between non-URM and underrepresented students. Asian students did not underperform in this course, so we define this. The gap, the groups that we're targeting actually gets defined on the front end, right? And we look at the control group to see where the gaps are emerging. And again, we see that the intervention eliminated that gap. There was no statistical difference between URM and non-URM students who received the intervention relative to students who did not. Okay, so this was a first replication, really excited about it, but, and there's always a but, we did a second replication and didn't replicate. So let's look at this one. So this was studied for also at University of Minnesota. We had a really great design for this one. Actually, there was 32 lab sections and TAs. There were 16 TAs who led the intervention, and each of them had 2 sections. And we had each of them do one treatment and one control. Okay, so this is a really nice experimental design for that reason. But what you'll notice here in the control group is that there was no significant gap between non-URM and URM students. Granted, there's a trend here, and you'll notice that these are error bars, by the way. This error bar is large in part because this is a smaller group, right? And this is a larger group. But the fact that this error bar is essentially overlapping with this error bar, that tells you right away, there's no difference here, no statistical difference, and the intervention didn't do anything. It just didn't do anything as a function of URM. Some other interesting data that the intervention did seem to be doing something, but I didn't do this, right? It didn't have any impact as a function of URM status. Okay? So what's happening here? It seems that the intervention does not have universal effects, right? It didn't help women in biology when there was no gap. It didn't help URM students in that biology course when there was no gap. But it did seem to benefit students where there were gaps, where those emergent gaps, what I'm calling emergent gaps, where those emerged. Okay, one more study. Study 5 is a evaluation study. We actually constructed a control group. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. I've just got one more data slide to share with you, but I'm really excited about it because of what it shows. Long story short, after we ran the intervention in 2017, we found those great results. We're like, all right, we can't do a control group anymore. It doesn't feel ethical. We're just going to do only treatment in 2018, 19, and 2020, by the way, which was also over Zoom. I don't have those data yet, though. And so to do our control group, we went back to 2015 and 16. Okay, so there's some problems with this. Right off the bat, you'll remember 2015 is like before Donald Trump. 2016 was like the term actually when the election was. And so there was no COVID, and for the 2019 term. So there's some temporal differences here. Nevertheless, we're just going to go with what we've got here. We control for what we can, and I'll just show you the data here. So what we looked at was first-year GPA, and these were the students who received the ecological belonging intervention, and these are the students who did not. These were the ones from 2015-16, and you remember the part of the control group from 2017. Okay, a couple things to notice here. You'll notice gender is not down here, but gender diversity is. Okay, so first big thing, there's a main effect. Okay, students who are now getting higher grades. Granted, this could be due, I'm fully aware this could be due to something like grade inflation. I don't think that's what's happening. There's some other points of data that don't have time to show you that I sort of that's not super persuasive to me. But this gap is, I think, what's really fascinating here. Okay, so remember that I'm arguing that this process is part of what is occurring in the classroom, okay, with how students are interacting. And so if you sort of follow this logic through, one could hypothesize that in more diverse classrooms, you might actually see larger effects because there's more of this group interaction occurring. That's exactly what we saw with gender diversity. So this is actually a very strong interaction here, that although overall students are getting higher grades, that seems to be especially true in classes that had higher gender diversity. Okay? And just to give you a benchmark for that, that was defined as at least 45% women in the class. Okay, so still, women are still a minority even in high gender diverse classrooms, but they're close to 50-50. And then the low gender diversity, this was -1 standard deviation, that was about 25%. Okay, so that's what we're comparing here. When women are 25% of the class versus when women are 45% of the class. But notice women are not what's being broken down here. Men benefited too. There was no gender interaction here. Okay. This is very preliminary data. These data are not published, and I'm still following up on them, but I'm seeing more and more evidence of this, that the intervention seems to be more effective in more diverse classrooms, right? So think about that, what that means for the diversity challenge I was describing. This intervention seems to be perhaps a way to help us meet the diversity challenge, to help students meet their full potential in diverse settings. Okay, how are we doing on time? All right, I'm getting close to wrapping up here. So summary of the results. We closed specific gaps where underperformance was occurring, but we had no effect where underperformance was not occurring. Okay. The effects persisted over time and affected both short-term and long-term outcomes. Okay, so we saw it on course grades. We also saw it on things like one-year retention. In that later study, we saw things on first-year GPA. So it's right. Think about that. That's out of the class where they got it, and then all of their courses for their first year. And those are engineering students. Their courses are tough, right? They have a set slate of courses. I think they maybe get one elective. So hints that it's not, there's also some hints here that non-stereotype students may also benefit over time. I'm still working on some of the theorizing for this, but what I think might be happening is that if, let's say, women are benefiting from this intervention and men are interacting with women who are benefiting from this intervention, those men may benefit by virtue of interacting with women who have kind of changed, right? And so then maybe it changes men's mindset too. That's just one potential hypothesis. If you have others, I'd love to hear them. So let's talk about practical. Like, how could you use this? Like, what do we do with this information? Well, for one, one of the easiest answers here is maybe to run the intervention. You could run the full-blown thing. You don't need a control group necessarily. I think I'd love a control group. That's just the scientist in me, but I don't think that would be that's certainly not a deal breaker. I'd be happy to consult, jump on Zoom, let's talk, I'll share materials. Actually, all these materials are already online. If you dig around, you can find them or shoot me an email, I'll point you to them. Take time, so short of that though, you can implement elements of the intervention, right? How would we do that? Well, take time to openly acknowledge that if students are feeling anxious or uncertain about their situation, they are not alone. Do a little timeout, especially at the beginning of the term. Just to let students know that you get it, that you're aware of what they might be going through. You were a student once too. In fact, I give you this quick anecdote here. I was giving this talk to a large lecture community at Pitt. So it's all faculty who teach large lecture courses. And one approached me after and he's like, I don't think I'm going to run the full intervention, but I was curious if you thought maybe I should tell blank students the story. I was like, oh, tell me. He said, what's funny is I'm actually teaching the course that I failed as an undergraduate. And he was like, I'm curious if you thought I should mention that. I said, oh my gosh, absolutely. Please tell your students this and explain how that happened. And he said, I was going through a lot of stuff as a first year student. I was not a serious student. I had, things were in flux and I really bombed that course, but I had a great instructor later and I turned things around and here I am now teaching that same course. This is, by the way, this also applies to parenting, right? Like telling your children that you've gone through this thing. I have young children, and I remember I told my daughter, I tried this once. My daughter fell down and her knee was hurting, really minor. And I said, oh, I remember when I skinned my knee. And she was like, really, Daddy, you've skinned your knee before? I'm like, yes, of course. Like we've all gone through this before. This is normal. This is part of growing up or becoming a college student. So assure them that most students, most of the time, these feelings go away with time. I wouldn't say, they're definitely going to go away for you or by the end of the term. Don't put it, but it can be a reassuring that for most students, this does get better. Okay, but again, I do want to put some caveats on this, right? This is not a cheer, self-esteem boost, rah, rah, everything's going to be roses in a world that's full of inequity. This is not that, okay? What is really important here is I'm going to just frame it this way, is to balance the positive and the negative, okay? In other words, there are real barriers. There is discrimination. There is racism. There is sexism, misogyny. There are concrete things in the class that are going to make you feel uncomfortable, right? The percentage of women in the class, you are a minority. That's objective. That's true. But I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't feel uncomfortable or that's not real. No, it is. It is absolutely real. You are going through real things that matter and that are important. But what's really important to keep in mind for these students is that this is not determinative. This is not who you're going to be. It's not what will ultimately decide your fate. Okay? These exist, but they're surmountable. Okay? They are things that will go, that you can work through, and that maybe even you as the instructor can help them do that. Okay, surmountable and not determinative. Okay, so final message here, again, is I think we have more power than a lot of us realize, that we can shape the classroom ecology in our classrooms to foster equity in the classroom and unlock student potential and help students meet their full potential. And so with that, I will say thank you. The paper the first two studies of this were published actually last summer. If we had a chat box, I'd put this in the chat, but we're in a webinar format. So I just pasted this up here. You can just Google me too, find my website. I've got links on my website as well to kind of a journalist take on this line of work. So maybe more accessible if you want to share it with other folks, and also links to all the papers that are relevant to this work as well. So yeah, you just find me on Google. And thank you. I'm happy to take questions. All right, I'll start with, okay, I'm going to answer this live. Yeah, feel free to use the Q&A, drop questions in. I'll just go through as they come in. Okay, so first question here is, given that the intervention is focused on anxiety and overcoming adversity, which does not seem tied to specific groups, why do you think that it only has benefits when a gap between group pre-exists? Yeah, so it's a great question. So what we think is happening is that actually we do feel like this is a universal message, but what's happening is that the doubts and the anxieties are not kind of uniformly distributed across the student body, right? So if you're within a classroom, there are some students who you could even argue maybe feel like they belong too much, right? They feel like they own the joint, right? And all the way down at the opposite end of the spectrum, there's students who are just terrified to be there, don't ever want to talk, lose sleep over this class, and are incredibly anxious. Okay, that spectrum exists independent of race and ethnicity, but it also is linked and correlated with race and ethnicity, and that will vary across domains and across classes, right? So there may be courses where white students feel like they don't belong, right? Maybe first-generation white students, for example. And we would expect and predict that the intervention would help those students in those courses, okay? So it's a great question. And what I'm hoping here is that there is at least a small benefit for all students, and then a particularly large benefit for the students that are really shouldering the belonging uncertainty, as Greg Walton refers to it, and the doubts about their ability in themselves. Okay, feel free to follow up if I didn't answer fully. Okay, next question here is, if I understand correctly, the intervention was limited to the one class period, introductory meeting of section. Could a single booster shot midterm or perhaps after the first test increase the strength of the intervention? I love this question. Yes, I think absolutely it could. We haven't tried that yet, but there's a great paper by David Yeager and Greg Walton. It's called Seed and Soil. It's the first line in the paper. And what they kind of argue is that you can do these interventions and you can also sort of fertilize, or if you will, booster them with subsequent things in the environment, with other elements that sort of reinforce the message, right? And conversely, you could kill the intervention without this stuff, right? So to give you a concrete example, if I am in this class and this instructor gives me this intervention, leads this classroom activity, and I'm internalizing the message. It seems great. But then I go to office hours and the instructor mocks me for not knowing something, right? Like, oh, this is so simple. Like, how do you not know this, right? What does that do, right? Could that actually make the intervention, like, maybe not just inert, but actually backfire? I'm not sure. It could. I think it could at least undermine it, right? It would certainly sort of be like, what? This doesn't add up. Like this, he said this thing this day, and now he's acting like I'm a fixed mindset with somebody that I just don't know stuff, right? And that I'm silly for not knowing it. That makes me feel really poorly. So yeah, this idea of the booster, that we can do multiple points of contact, absolutely, in part because also I think what you might be picking up on here is that the stressors can evolve over the term, right? So I might not be feeling a sense of belonging at time one, but then that sort of settles in later. And so then it could potentially counter that later angst that emerges. So yeah, we'd love to do this. I have sort of a proxy for kind of this, where we're doing, sorry, I get really long-winded with, especially on Zoom, but we're doing the College Transition Collaborative. I didn't actually check if I was part of this, but this was led out of Stanford for several years. And it was an online pre-matriculation belonging intervention, okay? And so what it was is essentially this message, adversity is normal and temporary, but delivered on the internet, okay? We did that at Pitt as well. And so what I'm hoping to do in the future, hopefully this coming year, is to actually be able to calculate whether students got our message twice, or once, or not at all. And did the students who received it twice do even better than students who received it once? So this dosage or booster idea is I think, super compelling and very important. And absolutely, I'm going to follow up on that. Okay, next question. I'll try to be less long-winded. I'm curious about the finding that the intervention brings up the performance of groups of students who are underperforming. Have you considered assessing doubts and anxieties at the beginning of the course and seeing if this moderates the effect of the intervention? That is, the group with doubts shows a benefit. Yeah, this is a great one. And there is, you probably picked up on this, especially the questioner here, how I was kind of trying to make it clear that we're not hitting you over the head with this information, that women are underperforming in this class. We're kind of mentioning it in one of the quotes by one of the women, and the other woman doesn't bring it up. What's the danger here? Like, I think that you could imagine maybe instilling threat, and as opposed to sort of acknowledging and hoping to ameliorate it, right? Like maybe telling students, you should be worried about this. Like she should pay attention to that, right? And so it was a fine line here. But yes, we have not collected the pre-survey data yet. What we've done so far is the post-survey data. So we're looking at belonging as an outcome variable as opposed to a moderator variable. But yeah, my prediction would be absolutely that the students who are kind of contending with the most doubts at the beginning of the term, and I think you'd want to make these kind of doubts about belonging in the domain, right? Not just in general, but that's another interesting sort of quibble, if you will. But then, yeah, we should see that the students who are the most kind of doubtful have the lowest self-efficacy, or the largest doubts of belonging, or highest belonging uncertainty, or maybe the ones with the strongest fixed mindset, or some combination of these, right? Maybe a fixed mindset with low efficacy, that could spell a lot of trouble. And are those the ones who show the largest benefits? And if so, that might show, with respect to the first question, benefits across groups, right? You wouldn't necessarily just expect women, you'd expect all students that were scoring high on that measure of, let's say, belonging, uncertainty, or low self-efficacy. Those students should fare particularly due from the intervention. Sorry, I've got a cough sneaking up. Oh, excuse me. Okay. All right. So I see that. I think that may be the last Q&A. Any final questions? Please feel free to reach out to me if over email. My email is just kbinning@pitt.edu. I'm happy to share materials, discuss. If you have more questions, want to follow up with whatever, I'm happy to chat. Otherwise, I guess I'll let you guys get started on your weekend here. Oh, good. It's only 5:34. I didn't break the clock too much here. But thank you all for your attention. Kind of strange format where I don't get to see feedback from you all, but thank you very much, John, as well, for inviting me. And yeah, I will wrap up.
Thank you for a great talk.
Oh, thank you. That's great to hear. Yeah, thank you, Toby and Kathleen as well. All right, folks. Have a good weekend. Stay safe. Stay home. Good weather coming up. I'll be rooting for you guys. I've got Iowa in my bracket. I think going to the Final Four against my alma mater. My alma mater, San Diego State. So it's a long shot, but they're ranked 6, I think, in the bracket. And they've never got past the Sweet 16, I don't think. But yeah.
Well,
maybe
thanks
this
for the
is
support.
Yeah. All right, John, take it easy. Thanks so much. And yeah, I'll maybe see you at the next conference, huh?
Yeah, and somebody from the college will be in touch with you soon about an honorarium.
Oh,